Hello to all of our listeners, and welcome back to The Parent Solution, your one-stop shop for all things educational. I'm your host, Kimberly, and today I have a guest with me, and we're chatting about something that is what I would say is very near and dear to both of our hearts. And I know for me, this is a driving force behind my business, and I love when I see other people with the same sort of passion. Houston native, entrepreneur, and educator Jennifer Ledwith understood from a young age that education and literacy were crucial to success, and her passion led her to ScholarReady, a virtual literacy-first tutoring service aimed at providing students with the support that they need to succeed in school and achieve a better life. Jennifer, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Kimberly. Thank you for welcoming me to your podcast.
I'm so happy to have you here. I know that we have talked about quite a few things, and we talked about a lot of different topics, but I think for today, the focus wanted to be more centered around literacy. Maybe it would help if you started for our listeners just with talking a little bit about your experience within the teaching field and kind of what led you to really have this passion that I know you have.
Okay, so thank you for asking. All right. When I was in college, my dream as someone who is from Houston, and I studied business at the University of Oklahoma, that pathway was supposed to lead to working in oil and gas, as you can imagine.
Mm-hmm.
And my dream when I was in college was to position myself to get a job as an energy trader. And I wanted to come back to Houston and work as an energy trader. And that's why I studied finance and economics at Oklahoma. And I had an internship one summer, and it was not related to my major. And it was a professor helped me land this internship, and it was at a nonprofit fair trade retail store in Houston. And the manager taught me how to sell. And she taught me how to sell. And she was a very good at selling. And it was very ethical, very caring, very conscientious, very successful at selling. And so she taught me how to sell, and I would sell these high-end items to people. And then I also was put in charge of the store.
Mm-hmm.
They put me in charge of the store one day. Now this is in Houston, and this is in like June or July, and the power went out. And because it had been like a crazy rain, it had been a crazy storm. And they told me, and so I was basically running the store and figuring out what was, trying to solve problems and help the staff, help the customers, and so forth. And when I left that summer, and I returned to college for my senior year, I said I want to be an entrepreneur. I want to start my own business. And so when I graduated college, I graduated without any student loans. Or I had one, but it was like $1,000 loan I had borrowed to buy plane tickets. But my parents didn't pay for me to go to school. I was able to pay for college because of my scholarships and because I worked part-time jobs throughout college. And I said, well, when I graduated, I said, I'm going to start a business helping people to learn how to do what I did. I thought my situation was normal, but then I started talking with my friends, and I started realizing how much they owed, thousands of dollars in student loan debt. And I said, I want to start a company that allows me to help people to allow them to do what I did. And I said, well, I think one of the biggest reasons behind my success in winning scholarships were my essays. I said, I'll start a business helping students write essays. And so I told my family that I thought that's what I was doing. And then my aunt, I think she just heard I was tutoring. And then she told one of her coworkers that, oh, my little niece can tutor. She can tutor math. She's really good at that. And I was like, I never said I was going to tutor math, but okay. And but it makes sense because I have a deep math background. And I tutored the young lady, and I tutored the girl rather. And she did really well on her in her class, in her algebra class. She did really well on her state exam. And I said, okay, I'm good at this. I like this. So I just started helping students with math. the big aha moment came for me when I started realizing that test scores were driving these scholarships for my clients. And that's when I was able to combine my love of helping students to become better writers and better readers with my love of helping them become good at math, into something that could really help them to do well, help them to excel on these tests and then get scholarships. Because I also I also perform very well on my tests, and that was a part of the recipe for me getting, for being able to qualify for me to be able to win all these scholarships. And so for me, when I get up, and so my job is to help my students to graduate with little to no scholarship, little to no debt. That's why I get up. That's my business, the way it's structured. I want my students to win. I want my students to win. And here lately, I realized that a hindrance to them winning is literacy. These students, and I have a friend who works with smaller children, because I work with like middle school and high school students. She works with elementary school students. And she said, Jennifer, these kids can't read. And I was like, whatever, that's not going to affect me. And then the children grew up and they started coming to me. And Kimberly, I was like, wow, like these kids cannot read. And when we talk about they can't read, what we're really saying is, while they can call words, if you ask them to tell you what they just read, they don't know. They can't do it. And that's why, the impetus for me getting out of the bed every morning and doing my job is to help my students win. And the literacy is the weak literacy is undermining their ability to win. Yeah.
I definitely resonate with that. I see, for myself, I work with all ages of students, and STAR Students works with all ages, because we're able to cover that range. But I see it a lot in elementary kids in particular, just like your friend, right? So, and it's right, because the lack of literacy, it bleeds into, so to speak, every aspect of your life. If you can't read, and it's not about being able to actually read the words, like that's a whole different story. But if you can't actually comprehend what you're reading, you are not set up for success as an adult in life, regardless of what you do, right? I mean, I'm someone who wants to inspire children to be independent and to be self-sustainable, and to be as independent as possible, and be as self-sufficient as possible, and have all of the capabilities and the possibilities, and to realize their full potential. And I assume that you would want the same for your students. With the lack of literacy, it's really hard to be able to do that. It's like you're shutting a door almost, right? Like some of my kids will ask me sometimes, like they'll say, oh, like, why are we learning this? Like, this doesn't make any sense. Right? And I'm like, because they're like, I'll never use this like in real life. And I'm like, you might not learn, you might not use this particular thing. You might not use this particular concept in your everyday life, day to day, right? But it's the literacy and the ability to be able to do something with that literacy, with the skills of literacy that you have, that really drives home the point of being able to do what you want to do, regardless of whatever that is. And I see it particularly, we see the results of this in older students, I find, that, they kind of get pushed through and it doesn't really get looked at, right? The lack of reading comprehension, the lack of writing ability, the lack of being able to focus and conscientiously or consciously put thoughts together for, like you said, an essay, or forget an essay. Like, you got a hard enough time with paragraphs these days, right? Like formatting a proper paragraph. Part of being able to do that, I think, is making sure that when you get to the age where that's going to be required of you, that you're able to do it. But when they get to the age where that's required of them, they can't. And nobody has said anything, because it's not, I feel as though there's not an important enough emphasis placed on it within the general schooling system.
Yeah, to your point, they're being pushed through. And the great thing about education now is that there's all this technology. And, when I was growing up, the report card was when I was in elementary school, it was a little handwritten thing that that the elementary school teacher would fill out. And then as I started going through middle school and high school, the report cards were printed and mailed, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now parents can access the students, not even just the report card, the students' current grades in real time on this, through this technology. So it's fascinating because you have all this communication, right? But what I noticed is people are getting the smoke, but there's no. It's odd because it's like they get the smoke, but they miss the signal. Mm-hmm. So you look at the students' grades and you see you see that little Johnny has like A's and B's, right? And then so the teachers, especially if not teachers, the parents, especially if parents don't work in education, the parents are like, oh, little Johnny's doing fine. Little Johnny is getting A's and B's. He's doing just fine. He's on the road to like you said, being a sustaining adult in the world. And we need literacy for that, whether students go on to college or they go into the workforce or the military right out of high school. The literacy is important for them to be functional, independent adults, which is what you're helping to encourage your students to become, self-sufficient and so forth. And so they believe that because it's like they're like this hyper technology is saying, yes, it's shouting A's and B's and A's and B's. Yeah. But then, I'm just curious about why, don't you ever wonder, why your student doesn't have homework, or if your student does have homework, it's only maybe like an hour, or, or don't you ever wonder why, don't parents ever wonder why their students don't have, I can see like a move away from physical textbooks. I get that in the environment that we're in right now. But don't you ever wonder why they don't even have access to like an electronic textbook, or maybe like things to be reading in their own time? And what's happening is they're just being pushed through. So the National Association for Educational Progress is saying that in the state of Texas, a good majority of our 8th graders in 2019 were reading below grade level. And so what happens to those 8th graders? Well, it's like you said, they get pushed through. And when they go through high school, they develop these coping mechanisms to mask what they haven't, that they can't read. And they've been doing this for a long time. They've been masking this for a long time. I've done this for 18 years now. I've taught children for 18 years now. This is the most polite group of students I have ever met, and they cannot read. They're just like, they're so polite. They're just, they're so polite. And it's, and then when they get to, so usually when people call me, it's, it's when the student is an 11th grader or 12th grader, and they're getting ready to prepare for the PSAT, SAT, or ACT. Now, in 2021, I saw a number of students. So last academic year, 2021, 2022, I saw a large number of students who were not, they weren't taking the SAT or the ACT or the PSAT. Okay. And now this year, this academic year, the lead up to this academic year, I'm hearing from more people serious about preparing for the test. Because the thing is, these tests are still being used to determine who gets scholarships. They still are. And I think some people had to learn the hard way. But anyways, even though, and people malign these tests and so forth, I know I make a living preparing for the test, so I do have a bias. And I fully acknowledge that the tests are problematic in some ways. But I'll tell you this, we're paying attention to all of the smoke, but we miss the signal. And, you hear all these bad things about these tests, and parents say, oh, well, my child isn't a good test taker. my child has test anxiety. Our children, that test wasn't designed for our children to succeed. And, all of that. So we hear all of that. And then you have, but then, and so here's the thing, the highest you can score on the SAT is a 1600. So I'll have students, let's consider two students. Let's consider a student who scores a 1550 and a student who scores a 1250. Am I concerned about either of those students' ability to succeed in college? No, absolutely not. No, because they've met the benchmarks for being able to succeed in their reading classes, or their classes that require a great deal of reading and writing in college. They've met the benchmarks for being able to do well on their math classes. But when someone comes to me as a senior with a test score that's like 950 or below, that is a test score that reflects poor reading comprehension. Show me a test score that low, and I'm going to show you a student who struggles to read. And it's unfortunate because, the parents, and I tell parents that. I say, well, this is what this indicates. This indicates that your child is going to struggle in college. What do you mean? He's in all advanced classes and he's getting A's and B's. And then I ask, ma'am, does your son ever have homework? No. Do you ever see your son study? No. He does all his studying at school. He does all his studying on the bus. Okay. Does your son have a book? No, they just take notes in class. Okay. That's why. When do you have to practice? You have to practice reading. And it's just and it's and it's a result of students being pushed through and people not being honest about where these students are.
Yep. I think that's a very touchy topic, but it's very true. I know I have heard it from the mouths of many teachers, that, here anyways, where we are in Canada, you actually cannot fail a student anymore in certain grades. You must push them through because they have to be pushed through. We're not holding students back. And I think that that's very damaging in a lot of ways. And whether they know the content of like math or science or whatever, right? But it speaks to, again, I like how you had that sort of analogy, like people are seeing the smoke, but they're not seeing the signal, because I think that's really accurate. There's all of this smoke all along the way, in grade, maybe in grades like 6 or grade 7 or even younger, and then into high school too, right? And you really start seeing the smoke. But what is the actual problem, right? I like to say that it's like putting a Band-Aid on an infected cut without actually disinfecting the cut first, right? If something is, or if you're internally bleeding and you're just going to put a bandage over the bruise that's forming on your ribs or your back or whatever, right? Like it's not solving the problem. When you look at it from a very basic standpoint, I think a lot of struggles academically for a lot of students come from that lack of reading comprehension and the inability to read. And you are a virtual tutoring service. I am a virtual tutoring service. I am not against technology. Technology is wonderful. Technology is allowing us to do this right now, right? Like to record this and to talk to each other. Technology is fantastic because I have met people and individuals, and I work with students, and I've met parents that I would never in my life have met otherwise. So I am all for technology. I'm all for making the greatest thing that we can out of the tools that we have. And it's amazing. And it comes with a lot of, kinks and whatnot that you have to work out, but it's amazing. But there is no replacement. Like there's, text to speech and like, oh, I'll just have it read it to me. Like when people say that to me, I'm kind of like, like it just rankles me just a little bit because I'm like, well, why would you have it read it to you? Because you're not actually exercising your ability to, number one, you're not exercising any literacy skills whatsoever. by listening to something, right? You're exercising audio skills, which is a skill in itself, like to be able to listen. But in this case, we're talking about the lack of literacy. It's much easier to listen to something than it is to actually sit down and focus and read something, right? Because it requires a lot deeper concentration to be able to read and to process things. I don't know if I'm the only one that does this, but when I read things, there's literally a voice in my head that is like reading it out loud in my head, like I'm hearing myself, right? And I always thought that was weird as a kid. So I don't know if I'm the only one that does that. But I always kind of found that helpful because it helps me to actually understand and comprehend what I'm reading. That's why it's called reading comprehension, because you're comprehending what you're reading. And that's another large thing, is that when you don't practice reading and when you don't practice reading comprehension, like I have a saying, all of my students know this. I say practice makes, and not one of them, they did when we first started, but not one of them says perfect now, because practice does not make perfect. Practice makes progress. And so
I like that.
Yeah. And all of them are good. They're good like that now, because they see the sense of it, right? Nobody's perfect. We're not going to expect ourselves to be. I don't expect my students to be, but I sure expect you to practice. And if you practice, you will progress, right? You get better at it. So I think that's a much more realistic expectation. But reading and literacy is one of those things that like you have to practice or you're going to lose it. And I think that I know that there's a huge that is hugely undervalued, that skill of being able to actually comprehend what you're reading. Because I mean, if we're speaking particularly in the English language, there's a lot of words that are, homophones and homonyms, and it requires an intensive sort of study. That's difficult, and not a lot of people want to do that, right? But I think we make it harder than we need to, right? Like, it doesn't have to be. It is important, but it's not something that has to be this super huge, big, huge process that we go through, like, 3 hours of homework a day of like practicing literacy. I don't think that that's necessarily the right answer, but I do think that regular and consistent practice is going to really make a difference.
Absolutely. And within that's part of the traits of, they have this cycle. There's been research, and the research has produced like an idea of like the virtuous cycle of a great reader. And then there's like the virtuous cycle of a struggling reader. And the virtuous part of that cycle of the virtuous reader is practicing, because then the more you practice, the more you understand.
Yeah.
And then the more you understand, the faster you read. And then the faster you read, the more you want to read, the more you want to practice. It's a part of that.
Yeah.
You talked about like getting to the actual problem. And that's part of it. Part of it is the practice. So then, but let me tell you something, and you probably experienced this in your own practice. Helping them to understand. That is hard. And, I have all of these books. Kimberly and I right now we're Zooming. So she can see my background and see all these books on my shelf. And, I have all these books. I've purchased books. I've gone to workshops about reading comprehension strategies. And one of the strategies is help students, make inferences. And so in order to make inferences, you have to activate your background knowledge. And, I'm sitting here reading this book and I'm trying these things out with my students. And then I realize, how does one activate background knowledge if one does not have it?
That's a very valid question. That's a very valid question.
And that is, and that's something that is really challenging. And it goes to when your students ask you, well, when am I going to ever use this? And that's those, they don't know. They don't ever know when they might learn, if they're learning a lesson about, I was a kid, I remember we were learning about dinosaurs. It was like, oh, we learned about dinosaurs again, and but when I encountered dinosaurs in my reading, I understand what I'm reading. And and so a lot of it is focusing on background knowledge. And I think, again, it goes to people saying, well, why do you have to learn, why do we have to learn about what, for example, one of the great foundations of building background, one of the great sources of background knowledge is history. Mm-hmm. And so people will say, well, why do we have to memorize dates and events and important figures when we can just go to Google and Google it? And it's like, okay, well, I'm reading this book right now with a couple of my students and reading this novel. And in this paragraph lists, like, in one short paragraph might be, I don't know, 50 words. In this short paragraph, the writer lists all of these major events of the 80s and major figures of the 80s. Mm-hmm. And it's like, like 7 or 8 references. Who wants to go to Google and look up 7 references per paragraph? Who wants to do that?
Nobody. Certainly not your students.
No, absolutely not. And that's why building the background knowledge is so important, because having that background, when of course, background knowledge is what we have in our head before we, what we have in our head. Mm-hmm. And we bring that to the text. And that helps us to be able to read faster. But there's such a dereliction of building background knowledge in our society. And that is what helped, even though we have these great, in the state of Texas and Tennessee and Mississippi and probably in another place across the country, the legislatures are requiring teachers to learn about the science of reading and learn about phonics. And that's great. Like, it's great to, and so in a way, they're like requiring them to teach them phonics, teach them how to sound, blend words, sound out words, blend syllables, blend letters, blend sounds, all that. And that's great. And it's great that they have phonics. But most of my students can pronounce words well. It's just that when it comes to understanding, they don't understand it because they haven't built the background knowledge. And it's just, and they don't understand it. And so they, so then we get to where we are now, where they are pushed through. And it's, and then them pushing through, it's like, go back to your analogy where you say it like you have this like cut, and it's like, it's like you look at this open gash, and it's like, okay, clearly, this looks like this looks like this might require some stitches. But instead, we're just gonna take a little Band-Aid. We'll take put a Band-Aid on it, and then just
hope for the best.
Yeah, good luck. Good luck to you.
All right, see you later. Have a blast. Yeah. I can really relate to that. And then once the challenge then becomes, and the challenge that I find now is that because everything has been, I don't want to say given to the new generation, but because there's a lot of things that have just been handed, right? Like, I did not grow up with a computer in the house. I think I was probably like, okay, maybe I grew up with one. Well, I was like 10, right? When we actually got a computer, and it was one of those big clunky ones that was originally created, right? And my dad worked in IT for Pepsi. His job is completely obsolete now, because this was like 40 some odd years ago. Oh, wow. Right? Like, and his job's completely obsolete because now computers do his job, right? But back like 30, 40 years ago, that was brand new. Technology was brand new, and that was something that was a big thing, right? So like, I did not grow up with, and then when we got the computer, like, there were limits, right? Like, my parents set parental controls. We could only access it at certain times of the day, right? If we were on the computer, we'd best be doing homework, or you were going to hear about it, right? You better be doing your homework before you're playing any games or you're doing anything else, right? And then they were computer games. They weren't like internet games, right? That's a whole different sort of story. But the point here is that I think because the new generation has grown up with so much technology, and there have not necessarily been limits placed on that technology, and there's not necessarily been any sort of limitations, it's become very difficult to build it is very difficult to build background knowledge because they just have knowledge at their fingertips, right? Why would I need to know that? I'll just go look it up on Google. Okay, yes, you can go look it up on Google, absolutely, but then what does that actually do for you? Like, then you know that thing, but then you're just going to move on, and it's just going to be a fact that's lost in your brain, right? Where's your background knowledge? I love how you really focused on that. I think that's a huge sort of solution that I would like to talk about, is this lack of background knowledge, and the building of this background knowledge is really important to literacy skills. Because when you think about like how we as adults, regardless of what you do in life, if you want to work, if you want to open your own business, if you want to, be the CEO of a top company, if you want to be the garbage man, if you want to be a janitor, like if you want to work a 9 to 5 at McDonald's, if you want to work at an office job, a corporate job, right? Like everyone has different dreams and different aspirations and different journeys they have to walk through life. So it's not about learning these sorts of literacy skills to be able to do one specific thing. No, it's going to help you in life regardless of where you go and who you deal with. Because no matter who or what you are, when you get to be, as a kid, when you get to be older, you're going to need those valuable literacy skills and communication. And not all of that is done through looking things up on Google and through, being able to just have knowledge right then and there, right? And I think it's almost like it's a lost art, the ability to be able to recall things, right? Like you mentioned, you were reading a book with your students, and there's these 7 things that happened in the 80s. If you don't have the background knowledge and you genuinely care about what you're reading, now you have to go and look those things up, right? Whereas if you worked on like reading more things and on expanding your own knowledge realm and developing that skill, that skill set, I suppose, of building your background knowledge, then you wouldn't have that problem, perhaps.
Yeah, absolutely. And what I see is my students who have the background knowledge, those are the ones who are going to school. Those are the ones who are getting the scholarships to go to college, like the serious scholarships. Those are the ones who are going to college. And I look at this, and I look at this, Kimberly, and I ask myself, why do we have to wait on the study? But I guess we're gonna have to wait on a study to come out that says that people who graduate high school with weak literacy skills have more student loan debt than those who have strong literacy skills. I don't know, but why do we have to wait on the study? Why can't we do something about this now? Because you look at you think about, and like you say, everyone is walking, everyone is walking their own road through this world. But it costs money to not be able to it costs money to not be able to read well. When we think about it's going to cost you something. When you think about, people who want to go, maybe not necessarily cost money, but it's going to cost opportunities. When you think about students who are wanting to go and pursue a military career straight out of high school. Okay, well, they have to take the in America, they have to take the ASVAB. Okay, so that's and that test determines where they're placed, what their job will be in the military. The higher the score, probably the better the job, okay, or the better the role,
I know that we've talked about like literacy skills. It's the opportunities. I really like that. Really resonates with me. It's not going to cost you money. It might not directly cost you money, but it's going to indirectly limit your income potential, and it's going to definitely shut some of those doors that could otherwise be open to you.
Absolutely. Especially when you think about students who are going to college. Okay, well, when you have weak literacy skills, you're going to start college in remedial courses. That has to be discouraging. It has to be discouraging to start college. Basically, you're in the 13th grade instead of your first year of college, and you're you're revisiting some of the same concepts you experienced, that you encountered when you were in high school. And you're in these remedial classes, you're paying in most instances, these remedial classes are not free. And it's adding to the time it's taking you to get your education. And then that's going to increase the amount of borrowing you have to do, because if you start college and if your application telegraphs low literacy skills, I mean, why would a scholarship committee give you money for academics? Now, if you're playing sports, or if it's for some other kind of talent, that's a different conversation. But when we talk about academics, like, colleges give money to people. Here's the thing: they've given money to students who they feel will, in all likelihood, become graduates and become alumni, who will then give their money to the university and start the cycle again for the next set of graduates. And why, if you have low literacy skills, university's not going to give you any money, because why would they even? Because they're expecting you to not do well. I mean, so when you graduate high school with low literacy, you start college in these remedial classes, you're not going to get academic scholarships, so you're going to have a lot of student loans. The likelihood of you finishing is, I think it's something about, I think I heard somewhere where in the United States, like 40% of student loan debtors, don't have a college degree. Can you imagine?
I can't.
Having
I can't.
Oh yeah, you're lucky. But let me tell you, it's rough. Let me tell you this. You're working, you're paying for the debt. You have the debt of someone who can. So typically in the United States, they say that, the life, somebody who has a bachelor's degree is going to make like $1 million more than someone who just has a high school diploma. So just think about it. You have these people out here who just have high school diplomas, who are paying for debt for someone who is supposed to be making like $1 million more over their lifetimes. So, I mean, and then what happens to, and I think this should be a wake up call for parents, because, is this person going to be self-sufficient? Is this person going to have to live with you? How is this going to affect a parent's ability to move on to the next phase of their lives? Or affect parents' ability to move, to their next phase of their life. So we talk about reading and literacy and how it affects the student. It affects the family as well.
Because how are you as a parent going to move, like you said, move on to the next stage of your life, right? Like, I mean, parents have children, and obviously if we didn't have children, the human race would die out. There wouldn't be people, right? And I firmly believe that children are a gift, but coddling them, and like, I mean, this is more the school system perhaps that I'm talking about here, but pushing them through to the next grade, and like the participation trophies and whatever else. Listen, if you can't do something, like when I grew up, if you couldn't do something, you learned how to do it, period. There was no participation trophy. There was no, like, there was a lot of encouragement. Good job, keep going, let me show you how to do it. But there was no participation trophy. There was no participation medal. It was, you need to learn how to do this, and here's why. Right? And it's that idea of becoming, like a self-sufficient and independent adult, so that you can have those doors of opportunity open to you. Because otherwise I recently started working with a gentleman who has zero literacy skills from scratch. And so we're starting from like book one. We're starting from book one, right? And now that situation's a little unique, but that happens where people don't have the literacy skills, and they look around at, the age of 20 or 21 or 22, and they go, oh my gosh, what am I doing? If I ever want to have other opportunities in my life in order to better myself, because I don't want to just have a high school degree, I don't want to just have graduated from grade 8. Because people don't look at that, right? If you, it's sad, because, you know, book knowledge is not everything, but these days, if you don't have some sort of post-secondary or some sort of, post-secondary or like university or college, education, it is very difficult to do anything other than like a physical manual labor job. Now, I'm not underselling the value of connections or building your own business. Like, never would I do that, right? Like, there are people who have come from nothing and made something of themselves. But those people who have come from nothing and who have made something of themselves, I assure you, had a high skill of literacy, because there is no way that they went from scratch to $1 million a year or $2 million a year, or, you know, I'm thinking of people like Gary Vee, right? Or Grant Cardone. I don't know what their post-secondary education is like, right? But people who have taken themselves, people of that sort of caliber, who have stepped outside of the system, so to speak, and said, I'm going to do my own thing. That's fantastic. But I promise you that their literacy skills, like, they can read, they can write, they can definitely comprehend what they're reading, because they've got to sign all those contracts. They've got to do all that business work. Like, you don't get to a good place in your life without having strong literacy skills, wherever you might define that good place as. Right. But most people are not defining a good place in their life as being 45, not being able to read, and working a 7 to 7 on a construction site, or overnight at a hospital, or whatever it might be. Right. You just don't want to close those doors of opportunity, to yourself and to the people around you. Like you were just saying, right? Like your family, whether that's your parents or your siblings, or, you know, your spouse and your kids in the future. You don't want to close those doors for them either.
Absolutely. And it, you know, there's a study that talks about how parents' education is going to indicate what, because now we're talking about like how this affects the whole family. And, you know, it talks about how a parent's education is a good indicator of how far the student goes in education.
100%.
So then people have to start thinking, okay, well, this is more than just about, you know, just one student. This is about that next generation, because is the whole family going to be in a cycle of illiteracy? And there are ways, and I will say this, there are ways to, I was listening to a presentation on literacy the other day, and the presenter talked about how it's easy to be in the cheap seats complaining about the problem. And he was like, I'm in the arena. I'm fighting in the arena.
Yep.
And you know what? It's hard being in the arena. It is hard. Like, it is one thing that I do in my practice, like I really focus on figuring out how I can help my students to build background knowledge, particularly with my middle school students. And it is hard work, because you know what is so, you know, and I think we were talking about accountability. And because they've been pushed through, because the reading is overlooked, because the thing is, what I've learned is I can help a student to understand the text, and then it's getting them to do the next thing, like follow directions and, you know, make sure they really understand it, make sure it's because students get a pass on reading, and because they're not practicing reading, they're not able to practice the next things that come after that. So usually, you know, I'll have students read something and I'll have them write about it, right?
Yes.
So
100%.
you know, so you're right, because you know, you can fake reading.
Yeah.
But you can't fake writing.
But when you're writing, when I ask you to write a summary, or I ask you to put together, you know, 3 facts that we've learned from this piece of writing or whatever, that's when the truth comes out. If you're comprehending what it is that you're reading. Yeah.
Absolutely. So you have to continue going after you get them practicing, after you help them to build this background knowledge, and what you say is practice makes progress, because we're going to keep going. We're not going to be perfect. We're going to make progress. And what I've learned is, because, you know, I'm like, oh, I'm feeling good. Oh, my students who read this book last summer, and it was set in Argentina, and it was about a young lady. It's called Furia by Kimberlys Said Mendez, I believe.
Okay.
And it was about this young woman who wants to become a footballera. So she plays, we in America we call we call football soccer,
Right.
but she wants to play football. She's in Argentina, and we learn about her, what she's going through as a result of her desire to become this footballera in her in her culture and in her circumstance and in her family. And we start with background knowledge because I said, if we get to the end of the summer and these children think that Argentina is a place in Mexico, I will have failed. And so we start off with, the background knowledge. Okay, what do you know about Argentina? Where is Argentina? What is Argentina known for? What are some things about women's rights in Argentina? And we go from there. And then the student, and at the end of the book, they read the book, and then we have this game night. And I had them play this game night where they had to like answer these questions about that's like related to the vocabulary of the of the book. And these kids did amazing, and I was like, yes, they did amazing. And so I get excited, and then it's like, okay, now it's time to write. And so when they write, I'm like, okay, well, I need you to, okay, well, they write, and I'm seeing fragments. And then when they write, they're more general and not specific about what they read. And then like they're having a hard time like conveying the ideas of like cause and effect, comparing, contrasting. So the thing about literacy, we talk about how it affects the family, but it affects, and you said it earlier, you said it bleeds through. It bleeds into other aspects of education.
Yeah.
And I think, once we are able to, we're in the arena and we're fighting to get them to become better writers, we have to focus on just like holding them to high expectations when it comes to writing. Because when I started to have them write, like, we would discuss the book and I'd be like, yes, they understand what's going on. I'm so excited. And then we get to writing and I'm like, oh,
did you?
Okay.
Did you? Yeah. Yeah. I think that no, you're very correct, because I see it personally with a lot of students that I start working with, is that they can talk to me all day, but like about tell me about the story. They're good, right? When I say okay, let's write a summary, it's like a blank. It's like a blank has been drawn, right? Like it's like they don't even know how to put together a summary. Like, so it's the very basic like paragraph structure of like, how do we write a summary, right? And people can say, oh, well, like, that sort of thing is not important. Okay, but I would argue that it is, because being able to properly express yourself through writing, that is a skill that is going to be invaluable. Like, you can't tell me that writing is going to totally disappear. Okay, maybe in 3,000 years, but is anybody going to be alive in 3,000 years? I don't think so, right? Like, we'll probably have blown the world up by then, to be quite honest with you. But but like this is the idea, right? Is that it's very difficult for a lot of students these days, I find, and even a lot of adults, to coherently express themselves through writing, let alone through talking, right? Talking, oral communication is a little bit different, but through writing. And that is one of the essential parts of literacy. And that is a problem, because when you get to be an adult, you're going to have to be able to write about things. You're going to have to be able to write to people. You're going to have to be able to, like, even just an email, putting emails together, putting letters together, putting campaigns together, being able to read and comprehend contracts, right? Like being able to read and comprehend legal documents, like that's huge. If you've got to respond to anything, right? Like that is a huge issue if you're not actually comprehending what you are reading, let alone if you're unable to respond in a written format.
Absolutely. And the writing is, the writing is the thinking. It's the, writing is thinking. And so often, I see students, I'm going to write the way I feel, and okay, that's great for the first draft. Now, let's think about what you're trying to say. And it's the thinking, it's the development of the reading and writing together form a foundation for critical thinking skills. And when you ask, like when your students are, when they're asking you, when you're talking with them about a text, and they can just talk on and on and on and on about it. And then when you ask them to write about it, it's like, whoa, okay, so I need you to practice thinking. Like in writing, I am asking you to practice thinking.
Mm-hmm. I've never heard it put that way before. That's very eloquent. That like the process of reading and writing is the foundation for it. It really is. The more that I think about that, that makes sense. It's the foundation for critical thinking, because writing is the way that we express our thoughts. And being able to make those connections, that's critical thinking. That's very eloquent. I love it.
Thank you.
No problem.
But you know what, also another is, hey, get them tested. They may have some type of learning disability. I mean, most of the students I work with do not. I mean, but we know that very few students. Now there are people who do have dyslexia, right? But most people do not. Most of this. So I think get them tested early, because some people do need to get tested early. I think parents need to go into the schools and make sure that their children are learning phonics. They're not learning how to guess words. I started telling my students, read, not guess. They're not guessing words.
I say the same thing.
Guessing words.
I say the same thing. Stop looking at the picture and read the word. Read the letters on the page.
And the thing is, and you know what? I would tell parents to don't be. I would tell parents to not, be patient with their kids, because if they're looking at, like you said, if they're looking at the picture and guessing at the word, that means that someone has taught them to do that, or someone has allowed them to do that. Yeah. And so we have to extend grace to these children and help them with their, and help them to unlearn these habits.
Unlearning the bad habits and understanding that it doesn't come from them, right? That's a behavior that they've been taught.
Yeah. And then also, I mean, like, I'm not expecting parents to go out here and learn how to teach phonics and teach their children phonics at home. I'm not asking. I think what parents can do is, again, make sure that they are teaching phonics in the school. And if they're not teaching phonics in the school, then you need to raise hell about it, because it makes a difference. I had a conversation the other day with a student who's in her early childhood education. They were learning something else other than phonics. And she's like going to the 11th grade, and she struggles with reading. She has to work really, really hard with reading. Now, if it's on like audio, she can understand it. But she struggles with reading, and it's because of the phonics. It's because of that, what happened with her at that young age. Another thing what parents can do with their kids is they can help their kids build background knowledge. Take them to, take them to a museum, take them to a park, take them places, or even just like watch documentaries, so they can learn concepts, and then talk with them about what they've just experienced, and then have them write maybe like a page about what they've learned, so you can check in and help them and make sure that, they're learning it. I mean, does that take time? I mean, I guess it's easy for me to say because I don't have children. But I mean, when you have children, look, this is what it is. You want your children to live with you for the rest of your life. Do you want your children to be independent? Do you want your children to be able to be able to do better than you did? Do you want your children to be able to realize their goals and their dreams? Whatever that looks like, because it looks like something for everyone. It's different for everyone. But I mean, doing these things, these things like helping them, making sure they learn phonics, helping them to develop their background knowledge. It's like you said, it's going to help them. It's going to open those doors for them. And wherever they're leading, wherever they want to go, they're going to be able to have options and choices and be able to experience a life well lived.
Mm-hmm. The life that they want to live, which isn't that the whole purpose of life, right? Like we're only here for such a short time anyways. You want to be able to enjoy your life, which means you want to be able to do what you want to do. You're not doing that if you don't have literacy skills that are going to keep those sorts of doors that you may want to have open to you. Right. So that's, I think, one of the biggest things. And I think that's a pretty good sort of wrap up of the solutions that we've talked about. And it comes down to, I mean, parental involvement in a child's life and in a child's education, because teachers can't do it all. Teachers in public schools are amazing people, but listen, there's 30 kids or 25 kids, definitely 20 plus kids in that classroom. And I don't care how old they are, you cannot effectively teach that many children and get through to all of them on the same level. Right. So I think that building literacy skills, and that's a huge thing that I emphasize in all sorts of education. But it's a huge thing that I emphasize is the parental involvement. You have children to grow future independent, self-sufficient, amazing, capable human beings. You don't have children to be able to just drop them off and let them raise themselves. That's not supposed to be. Right. So I think literacy is a huge part of that.
I have some handouts available if your listeners are interested.
For sure.
On the website. So we have there's ScholarReady.com /the parents.
Right, with an S on the end.
/ yes, we have. So that website that will allow parents to caretakers, educators, students, anyone who has a vested interest in improving literacy for the people in your community. There are downloads that you can go to this website and you'll be able to download resources, download to learn more about literacy and some tips for improving literacy. And also throughout the website, you can browse about some and look at some of the things that ScholarReady is offering. We have some interesting new offerings that we're working on, interesting new programming. So I encourage parents to bookmark that page and visit us often. They can also subscribe to the newsletter on the website. And there's also a contact us page. So they can, hey, if you want to reach out to us at ScholarReady, if you have questions, if you'd like to work with us, we, like Kimberly said, we teach virtually. And I'd love to talk with you.
Thank you so much for being here, Jennifer. I really appreciate all your time, all your insights, and your experience. And it's a pleasure to be able to talk to another educator who is along the same sort of lines. I love when I get to talk to people who have the same sorts of values. And I think literacy is one of those things. It's a building foundation block for a lot of future opportunities in society. So thank you very much for being here.
Thank you so much, Kimberly. Have a lovely day.
If you have any comments or questions, please feel free to reach out. You can always find me on social media. It's Star Students on Facebook and LinkedIn, or starstudents.learning on Instagram. You can also reach out through email, which is all over social media channels. Thank you, as always, so much for listening, and I'll be back next week.